I know a little something about what it takes to fly a helicopter when you've been hit by enemy fire. That was heroic. I'd rather be associated with Mike Novosel than a failed Confederate traitor. I don't know whether you are inexperienced or too incompetent, but I wonder when you will actually focus on our nation's warfighting mission. We know that California is just a deliberate, systematic, political, and dangerous campaign led by you. We should not be using our military to play cops against
Senator Tammy Duckworth has never been afraid to speak truth to power. A decorated combat veteran and double amputee who flew helicopters in Iraq, Duckworth understands the costs of military leadership decisions in a way few in Washington ever could. And in this Senate Armed Services Committee hearing, she unleashed a searing rebuke of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, appointed by Donald Trump. Duckworth exposed Hegseth's failed billion-dollar mission against the Houthis, his reckless leadership style, and his dangerous role in turning America's military into a political tool for Trump. With sharp questions to General Kine and pointed references to colleagues like Senator Angus King, Duckworth made clear that the stakes for our democracy are far greater than partisan theater. Today, we're breaking down Duckworth's powerful remarks and what they mean for the future of America's defense.
Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In response to my colleague from Oklahoma, I believe the Secretary of Defense has just responded last week and admitted that the $1 billion mission that he led against the Houthis, who do not have a Navy, has not restored the transit of U.S. flag commercial vessels through the Red Sea, and in fact has resulted in the loss of 2 F-18 Hornets to the tune of $60 million apiece, as well as, I believe the last count was 7 Reaper drones to the tune of another $200 million. You are blowing through money like my fellow cadets and I did in our first Liberty after basic camp. Luckily, I didn't end up with a questionable tattoo. Your failures, Mr. Secretary, since you've taken office has been staggering. You sent classified operational information over Signal to chest thump in front of your wife, who, by the way, has no security clearance, risking service member lives in the process. You blew the $1 billion fight against the Houthis, whom, again, as my colleague says, has no Navy, and yet you lost all of those aircraft. You've created such a hostile command environment that no one wants to serve as your chief of staff or work with you in other senior DoD leadership roles. But what we should all be talking about more than all of this is that you have an unjustified, un-American misuse of the military in American cities, pulling resources and attention away from core missions to the detriment of the country, the war fighters, and yes, the war fighting that you claim to love. I don't know if this is because you are too inexperienced and incompetent to understand the real threats facing our country, or if it's because you are just an unqualified yes man who can't tell the president how to keep Americans safe. You are focusing on renaming bases for Confederate generals. You said just now to Senator King that to a man and to a woman, we would rather be associated with the old Confederate names. Well, I am one of those women. I served at Fort Rucker, Alabama, a base that was named for a traitor who took arms against the United States of America, led troops who killed Americans. It was renamed for Mike Novosel, a Medal of Honor recipient, who in his citation for the Medal of Honor includes that he saved 29 American lives, to include hovering backwards in a helicopter towards an enemy bunker where a wounded American was laying and saved that person, including after being taken fire himself. I know a little something about what it takes to fly a helicopter when you've been hit by enemy fire. That was heroic. I'd rather be associated with Mike Novosel than a failed Confederate traitor. I don't know whether you are inexperienced or too incompetent, but I wonder when you will actually focus on our nation's warfighting mission. We know that California is just a deliberate, systematic, political, and dangerous campaign led by you. We should not be using our military to play cops against Americans. General Kane, as chairman, a key part of your job is to coordinate military planning across the joint force. Is the department currently incorporating into any military plans expanding the use of the reserve forces to include the National Guard or active duty troops to support domestic law enforcement, including in other locations in the United States?
Senator, you know, we careful.
No, General.
Well, it's not really a yes or no question, Madam Senator. We plan all kinds of different things.
I think it is a yes or no question.
I'm not aware of anything, but the reason why I'm answering is the tags may be looking at something that I'm not aware of.
What are you doing at your level? You're not aware of that happening at your level? Because we know that on his first day, President Trump directed U.S. Northern Command to revise its unified command plan to add new planning requirements to combat, and I quote, criminal activities. A series of follow-up executive orders continue to redirect DOD priorities to supporting domestic law enforcement, including one in April that tells DOD, and I quote, use national security assets for law and order. In other words, do law enforcement's job. I'd like to enter these executive orders into the record, Mr. Chairman.
Is there objection? Without objection, so
Secretary
ordered.
Hegseth, you say you are focused on warfighting and warriors. These are your words. Yet you are diverting untold DOD resources and attention to a fundamentally non-military mission of domestic policing. Across the country, we have qualified police officers who are trained for that mission. They know those streets better than the Marines you deploy to Los Angeles, who normally focus on the Indo-Pacific. And you recently approved 700 more troops in 3 other states to do admin and logistics works for ICE. You say all of this is valuable training, but I would much rather have our troops do tough, realistic training relevant to high-end combat. Instead of typing in spreadsheets for ICE, they should be conducting live fire maneuver exercises. Instead of patrolling American neighborhoods and standing in front of federal buildings, they should be rehearsing call for fire missions. We have local police who can stand in front of those federal buildings. And the list of distractions goes on. You are encouraging the DOD workforce to go work for DHS in increasing numbers. You're pulling the military away from facing foreign enemies who literally say things like death to America. And you're putting troops with weapons aimed at Americans. Mr. Secretary, let the military get back to its real job. Stop forcing them to do DHSs. And if you want to be the DHS secretary, maybe you can apply for that job when you're fired from this one due to your incompetence.
Throughout her remarks, Duckworth returned to the same central theme. The job of the U.S. military is to defend America from foreign enemies, not to be used as a political pawn. She emphasized that local police are trained to handle domestic security and community law enforcement. Redirecting military units to those missions was not only a misuse of resources, but also a weakening of national defense readiness. Every hour spent guarding a building in Washington or Los Angeles was an hour not spent training for real combat. Every soldier filling out ICE spreadsheets was a soldier not conducting joint exercises in the Indo-Pacific. Duckworth's rebuke of Hegseth was also a rebuke of Trump himself. She made clear that the orders Hegseth followed came directly from the Oval Office, and that they represented a deliberate politicization of the military. This is what makes her intervention so important. As a Democrat, a veteran, and a senator, Duckworth articulated the fundamental danger Trump poses to American democracy. The military's role is sacred in the American system. It is to defend against external threats, not to intimidate citizens. By using the military as a domestic police force, Trump blurred that line and endangered the very democracy the military is sworn to protect. Senator Angus King, also on the committee, had earlier pressed Hegseth on his misplaced focus, and Duckworth reinforced that critique. Together, they showed how Democrats on the Armed Services Committee were unified in their concern that Hegseth and Trump were endangering readiness while pursuing culture wars and political theater. By the end of her remarks, Duckworth's conclusion was devastating. If Hegseth wanted to be Secretary of Homeland Security, he should apply for that job. The job of Defense Secretary is not to do ICE's work, not to patrol American neighborhoods, and not to defend Confederate names. It is to prepare and lead the U.S. military in real warfighting missions, something Hegseth had utterly failed to do. For Democrats, Duckworth's stand was a rallying cry. It showed that their party is not only committed to fiscal accountability and military readiness, but also to protecting the principle that America's military must never be used against its own people. For Republicans, it was a humiliating reminder that their claim to be pro-military is often nothing more than political branding, contradicted by their actions under Trump. The stakes in this fight could not be higher. Every wasted dollar is a dollar not spent on equipment and readiness. Every politicized deployment erodes trust in the military's neutrality, and every step toward militarizing domestic law enforcement is a step away from democracy itself. Senator Tammy Duckworth reminded the committee and the country of what true patriotism looks like. It is not chest-thumping, it is not defending traitors' names, and it is not using the military as a political toy. True patriotism is fighting for a strong, focused, professional military, one that honors real heroes like Mike Novosel, and one that protects Americans from foreign threats, not from each other. Her warning to Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump was clear: stop wasting taxpayer money, stop abusing our troops, and stop endangering America's security for your political games. And her warning to the country was even clearer: democracy is only safe if we keep the military where it belongs, defending the nation, not policing the people. Senator Tammy Duckworth's remarks during the Senate Armed Services Committee hearing cut like a blade through the fog of political theater. As a decorated combat veteran and helicopter pilot who lost both legs serving in Iraq, Duckworth commands a moral authority in defense matters that few others in Congress can match. And in this exchange, she wielded that authority against Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, one of Donald Trump's closest political allies, exposing failures, hypocrisy, and dangerous misuse of the U.S. military. Duckworth began by directly referencing Secretary Hegseth's own admission that the $1 billion mission against the Houthis had failed. Despite spending staggering sums of taxpayer dollars, the campaign did not restore transit for U.S.-flagged commercial vessels through the Red Sea. Worse, it cost the United States critical aircraft, 2 F-18 Hornets at $60 million each, and 7 MQ-9 Reaper drones worth another $200 million. Nearly $500 million in losses, with no strategic gain. For Duckworth, who once piloted a Black Hawk helicopter into combat and understands the value of every machine and every soldier's life, these losses weren't just numbers. They were symbols of wasted lives, wasted effort, and wasted resources. With biting humor, she compared Hegseth's recklessness to cadets blowing their money on liberty after basic training. Except, she emphasized, this was not beer and tattoos. This was American taxpayer dollars and national security flushed away under Hegseth's watch. Duckworth then widened her critique, attacking the culture of arrogance and incompetence at the top of the Department of Defense. She called out Hegseth for sending classified information over Signal to brag to his wife, who holds no clearance, endangering lives for personal vanity. She highlighted his inability to keep a chief of staff or senior leadership around him due to a hostile command climate. These failures, Duckworth argued, revealed not only incompetence, but also a deeper unfitness for the role of defense secretary. But her most damning accusation was directed at the Trump administration's deliberate misuse of the military. Duckworth accused both Trump and Hegseth of transforming America's armed forces into a domestic police force, diverting troops from training for real warfighting and instead deploying them to American cities for political theater. She noted that Marines trained for Indo-Pacific operations had been sent into Los Angeles neighborhoods, that 700 troops were approved for paperwork duties with ICE, and that military units were ordered to guard federal buildings instead of conducting live fire training. When General Kine, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, tried to downplay these concerns by saying he wasn't aware of such planning at his level, Duckworth pressed harder. She reminded the room that on his very first day, Donald Trump directed U.S. Northern Command to revise its unified command plan to include combating criminal activities. She entered into the record Trump's executive orders that explicitly instructed the Department of Defense to use national security assets for law and order. This, Duckworth stressed, was not defense. This was policing, a job for civilian law enforcement, not America's warfighters. She also challenged Hegseth's defense of Confederate base names, where he claimed service members would prefer to keep them. Duckworth, who served at Fort Rucker in Alabama, made the debate personal. Fort Rucker had been named for a Confederate officer who betrayed the United States. Today, it is Fort Novosel, honoring Medal of Honor recipient Mike Novosel, who saved 29 American lives under enemy fire. Duckworth reminded the committee that she too had flown a helicopter under fire, and she made her preference clear. She would rather serve at a base honoring Novosel's heroism than one glorifying a Confederate traitor. Her message to Hegseth was unmistakable. True American heroes deserve to be honored, not men who killed U.S. soldiers in defense of slavery.